Top 5 causes of U.S. entry into World War I.
Lusitania sank on May 7, 1915. 1,198 people died, 128 of them were Americans. The United States declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917. Count the months between those two dates. 23. Almost 2 full years. 2 years in which a country supposedly enraged past all endurance somehow managed to contain itself. Wilson protested. Wilson negotiated. Wilson ran for re-election in 1916 on the promise that he had kept us out of the war. And he won. So whatever finally carried the United States into the First World War, it was not that ship. Today, the top 5 reasons the United States entered World War I. And the real one is not the one on the poster. 112 years ago this week, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the machinery of Europe began to turn. Within days, the continent was at war. The United States was 3,000 miles away, and the overwhelming majority of Americans intended to stay there. 32 months later, however, they were in the trenches. Before we count down, understand what this list is measuring, because it is not a list of villains and it is not a list of events. It is a list of causes, ranked by depth. Number 5 is the reason everybody names first. Number 1 is the condition underneath all of them, the one that, had it been absent, most likely changes the outcome. And one rule, the same rule we run every week, at every single item on this list, I am going to give the case for war at full strength before I say one word against it. Not a straw man, the actual argument made the way its best defenders made it. Some of these arguments are serious. And if you disagree with everything this channel stands for, you should still hear your own position stated fairly and completely. Did this leave Americans more free or more governed? Let us count them down. Number 5. Number 5 is the Zimmermann telegram. In January of 1917, the German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a coded message to the German minister in Mexico. If the United States entered the war, Mexico should join Germany, and Germany would help Mexico recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Now here's the case for war at full strength. A foreign government putting in writing a proposal to dismember the United States of America, it solicited an armed neighbor to invade 3 American states. Zimmermann was handed the chance to call it a British forgery, and instead, on March 3, 1917, he stood up and admitted that he wrote it. No ambiguity, no deniability. A great power had proposed carving up American territory and then confessed to it in public. That is not nothing. Anyone who waves it away is not being serious. But read that sentence again. If the United States entered the war. It was a contingency. It was what Germany would do if America declared war first, which is to say, it was a plan for war Germany was desperately trying to avoid. And it was a fantasy. Mexico was 3 years into its own revolution and had no capacity to threaten anyone. The Mexican government looked at the offer, studied it, and turned it down as unworkable. The telegram did not put America into the war. It gave permission to a decision that was already being made. It sits at number 5 because it is the most cited and the least load-bearing reason on the list. Number 4. Number 4 is the strongest argument on this list, and I want to give it every inch it deserves. On February 1st, 1917, Germany announced that it would sink any ship in the waters around the British Isles without warning. Neutral ships, passenger ships, any ship. In the weeks that followed, American vessels went down with American crews aboard. Unrestricted submarine warfare. Here's the case, and it is a real one. A nation declaring a stretch of open ocean and killing zone does not thereby acquire the right to kill neutrals in it. A neutral country has the right to trade and the right to sail. That should sound familiar to all of us in the summer of 2026. If a great power can announce that your ships will be destroyed on sight and you accept it, you have not preserved your neutrality. You have surrendered your sovereignty and called it peace. Germany made that announcement knowing full well it would probably bring America in, and made it anyway, gambling it could starve Britain out before American troops could cross. That was a calculated risk taken against the United States. Wilson did not invent the provocation. Germany handed it to him. That is the honest case for war, and it is the best one that there is. Here's what it leaves out. The submarine campaign was itself an answer to something. From 1914, Britain had blockaded Germany and extended the definition of contraband to include food. Estimates of the German civilian dead from that blockade run from roughly 424,000 in the careful academic revision to the 763,000 with the influenza pandemic muddying the attribution, as was cited by the German Board of Public Health. Whatever the true number, it is enormous. And those people starved. The blockade was doubtfully legal under the rules as they stood in 1914. And the United States protested them both. It just did not protest them both the same way. Against Britain, Washington filed complaints, accepted compensation for seized cargo, and moved on. Against Germany, Wilson announced that he would hold Berlin to strict accountability. One belligerent starved civilians and got a letter. The other drowned civilians and got an ultimatum. Both were killing non-combatants. Only one was treated as a reason to fight. The asymmetry is not an accident, and the rest of this list explains it. Number 3. Woodrow Wilson's ideology. The case for it first, and honestly, Wilson believed what he said. He was not a cynic. He looked at a continent grinding itself into paste over a triangle of alliances and dynastic grievances. And he concluded that the whole system of European power politics was the disease. He thought a lasting peace required something better than another negotiated pause between wars. And he intended to build it. The League of Nations was a serious idea, seriously meant by a man who genuinely wanted this to be the last one. And that is precisely the problem. On April 2nd, 1917, Wilson told Congress that the world must be made safe for democracy. He said America had no selfish ends to serve. He said the right is more precious than peace. Read those sentences as a war aim, and they are unattainable because they have no end state. You cannot sign an armistice with safe for democracy. You cannot negotiate a settlement with an enemy who is not a rival but a moral defect. Wilson took a European balance of power war, the kind that historically ends when both sides are exhausted enough to split the difference, and converted it into a crusade. And a crusade cannot end in compromise. It can only end in unconditional surrender. It did. 4 years later, the terms imposed at Versailles guaranteed the next Great War. Number 2. Control of the information channels. Number 2 begins on August 5th, 1914, one day after Britain declared war on Germany. A British cable ship put to sea and cut Germany's transatlantic telegraph cables. From that morning until the end of the war, essentially every piece of news that crossed the Atlantic to an American newspaper crossed it through British hands. Britain then built an operation to use them. A propaganda bureau at Wellington House, kept secret from the British public, aimed squarely at American opinion, cultivating American journalists, editors, clergy, and academics, and feeding curated material to influential Americans who then circulated it as their own conclusions. And now, defense of that campaign, because it is stronger than the non-interventionist retelling usually allows. The German atrocities in Belgium were real. This is not a propaganda invention. German forces killed roughly 6,500 Belgian and French civilians in the opening weeks of the war, 129 separate major incidents, and at Dinant alone, 674 people. The justification offered at the time that German troops were suppressing irregular fighters was itself the fabrication. That happened, and no argument about British propaganda gets to stand on top of that. What was invented was the embroidery, the severed hands, the crucified prisoners, the bayoneted babies. The Bryce Report, an official British inquiry that swept authentic massacres together with testimony no one could ever verify, and published the whole thing under a seal of a respected former ambassador to Washington. And that is the mechanism worth understanding. The most effective propaganda is not a lie. It is a truth with the counterweight removed. Americans heard about the Dinant, and they did not hear about the blockade. Both were happening. They only ever received one. You cannot be neutral about a war you only see from one side. Before we get to number one, the honorable mentions, and fast. The British blockade and the double standard. Black Tom, July 30th, 1916. German saboteurs detonated 2 million pounds of Allied-bound munitions in a Jersey City harbor. 4 people dead, shrapnel in the Statue of Liberty, real German aggression on American soil. 110 years to the day before this segment airs. And almost nobody remembers it. Walter Hines Page, the American ambassador in London, described by his contemporaries as more British than the British. When your own ambassador has quietly changed sides, you are not being informed. You are being handled. And the Russian Revolution of March 1917. The Tsar abdicated 3 weeks before Wilson's war message. It is difficult to sell a war for democracy while allied to an autocrat. Then, conveniently, the autocrat was gone. Number one, in 1914, the United States sold about $800 million in goods to Britain and France. And in 1914, the United States sold $169 million in goods to Germany. By 1916, the United States sold to Britain and France roughly $3 billion. And to Germany, under $2 million. That's not a decline. That's an erasure. Then the lending. By the spring of 1917, American banks and investors held somewhere around $2.3 billion in Allied paper. The figure for Germany was about $27 million. More than an 80-to-1 ratio. That is number one. Financial and commercial entanglement and the one-sided neutrality it purchased. J.P. Morgan and Company was not merely lending to Britain. Morgan was the exclusive purchasing agent for Britain and France in the United States, running Allied contracts worth billions through American factories. By 1917, American prosperity and Allied victory were not two things, they were one thing. Now the defense at full strength, because it is a real one and it is legally correct. Trade with belligerents was lawful. Nothing in neutrality obligates a country to impoverish itself. The loans were private transactions between private parties, and it would have been an extraordinary intrusion for the federal government to forbid Americans from lending their own money to whomever they chose. Every part of that is true. And it was answered in advance, in writing, by the Secretary of State of the United States. On August 10, 1914, 6 days after Britain entered the war, William Jennings Bryan wrote to Wilson to argue against approving loans to any belligerent. His reason, money, Bryan wrote, is the worst of all contrabands because it commands everything else. He added a question the century has since not improved upon. The government discourages American citizens from enlisting in foreign armies. Why should American dollars be permitted to enlist instead? He was overruled. In June of 1915, he resigned. And here's the part almost nobody knows. This was not a warning that only cranks and pacifists were making. In November of 1916, the Federal Reserve Board, the government's own central bank, 5 months before the declaration of war, issued a public caution to member banks that it did not regard further investment in Allied Treasury bills to be in the interest of the country. The Federal Reserve looked at the exposure and said out loud, that this had gone far enough. 5 months later, the United States was on the side of the debtors. Within weeks of the declaration, Congress extended $1 billion in credit to the Allies. And the first advances went straight out to London and Paris, where a substantial share went immediately to serving what was owed to Morgan. I am not telling you a group of bankers ordered a war. There is no meeting, no memoranda, no order. That version is caricature, and it collapses the moment anyone examines it. The real claim is smaller and much harder to escape. A country cannot be one side's principal creditor, one side's armorer, and one side's sole news source, and also be the war's neutral judge. Neutrality is not a statement you issue. It is a position you occupy. And by 1917, the United States did not occupy it. Every incentive the country had ran one direction. Every institution, the banks, the exporters, the newspapers, the State Department, the ambassador in London, was already leaning the same way. The submarines and the telegram did not create that. They arrived and found it waiting. That is why it is number one. Everything above it is a spark. This is the room full of gas. Now there's a name you have been shouting at the screen since we began this segment. Where is the Lusitania? Here's the answer, and it is the whole list in one ship. The Lusitania was a British passenger liner carrying munitions. That is not a conspiracy theory. 4.2 million rounds of rifle ammunition and 250 cases of shrapnel shells were on the cargo manifest. Germany had published warnings in the American newspapers right next to the sailing notices that if the ships entering the war zone sailed at their own risk. Whether the ammunition caused the second explosion that sank her in the 18 minutes is still argued and probably always will be. It does not matter. The munitions were aboard. And months earlier, in February of 1915, Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, had written to a colleague that it was most important to attract neutral shipping to British waters in the hope, especially, of embroiling the United States with Germany. He added that if some of that traffic got into trouble, so much the better. Now, that memoranda was about neutral shipping, and the Lusitania was British. It is not a smoking gun. I am not going to pretend it is. What it is the stated policy of the man running the Royal Navy. American entanglement was the objective. And here's why the Lusitania is not number one on this list. She sank in May of 1915. America went to war in April of 1917. If the sinking of the Lusitania were the cause, the country would have gone to war in 1915. It did not. It went to war 23 months later, after the loans had piled up, after the trade had become dependence, after 2 more years of war Americans could only see from one side. The Lusitania is the image everyone remembers because it's the easiest one to put on a poster or in a history textbook. It is not the cause. It is an advertisement. Here's the thread that runs through all 5. Not one of these causes announced itself as a cause. The loans were legal. The trade was profitable. The news was the only news available. The ideology was sincerely held. Each step taken by itself was defensible. And each one narrowed the range of choices available at the next step, until a country that had voted for peace in November found itself at war in April and could not clearly explain what had changed. And then look at what the war did at home. Conscription, the Espionage Act, and the Sedition Act, a socialist candidate for president imprisoned for making a speech. 116,516 Americans dead, and half of them from disease. A peace that produced the next war. This is what entanglement costs, and the bill always arrives after the vote. So we ask the only question that cuts through it, the question we ask about everything on this channel: did this leave Americans more free or more governed? Now that is the list, and you can tell me where I got it wrong. If you think the submarines belong in number 1, make the case. But tell me why a country that would not fight over the Lusitania in 1915 would fight over the same conduct in 1917. And what changed in between? Show your work. I am listening. And if this is your first time here, the same question drives everything we do, including the full series on where American liberty came from and where it went. Self-evident. The road to 1776. Subscribe, and I'll see you over there. Until next time, have a great day.